I don't normally make videos about my writing, or solely about my writing anyway, but that's what I'm going to do today. We're going to try something different because something's changed. I feel different. To give you some context, since the start of the pandemic, I've been focusing on short fiction, microfiction of 100 words or flash fiction of 1,000 words, a few short stories that are longer than that along the way. But short stuff, small projects that I could easily finish. But before that, in the preceding 10 years, I wrote 7 novels, all at different stages of what I would call completion. They were all complete, finished first drafts of an entire book, but some were 3 drafts, some were just 1, some were finished with blurbs and sent out to agents. They were all different. One of them I self-published because I wanted to find out about the process and because I had family that wanted to read it. A couple of them I finished and then did nothing with. A few of them I sent out to literary agents and I usually got one of 2 responses back. Either a flat template, no thanks, this isn't for us, or I got, we really liked it, the quality of the writing's there, but we're not sure who we would send it to. We're not sure if we know an editor that would deal with this kind of thing or if there's a market for this kind of thing. The last novel I wrote, honestly, I thought it might be the last one I ever write. I spent months planning it bit by bit, bullet point by bullet point, and then I wrote it all in 3 months at feverish pace, or that's feverish pace for me anyway. And by the time I'd finished that process, I was so burned out on novel writing that I never wanted to touch it again. That's kind of why I spent the pandemic writing short fiction, because I could write it, finish it and be done with it, and I didn't have to worry about an overarching plot or something longer to keep chipping away at and applying hard work day after day. But I must have had a blip at some point during the last 2 years because I started a novel. I wrote the first couple of chapters of it and I really liked it, and it ended up going nowhere because I ran out of ideas for it. But a couple of weeks ago, I read over it and I thought, this isn't as terrible as I thought it was. In fact, I didn't think it was terrible at all. I just thought, no, I don't want to work on this anymore. But I did. When I actually read it, I did. So I brought it back from the dead and changed the entire story more or less and created more of a plan, more of an idea for what this novel's going to be as a whole. And the thing just keeps expanding, which I really like, but it's expanding in a way where I feel like I can control it and it's a good thing. And it feels different. The whole way I'm approaching this novel feels different from any novel that I've written before. I feel differently about it. I feel enthusiastic. I want to work on it every day. I don't have to force myself to at all. It's going quite well. Can't wait until a year's time when I look back on this video and think, oh, you poor fool. Could happen. Can always happen with writing, that's just how it goes. So with that somewhat miraculous change of heart, I thought it might be a good idea to make a video about how it feels to be back writing novels after a bit of a holiday, if you want to call it that, and also tell you a bit about the project itself. I'm really excited to write it and work on it and figure it out, and I'm already coming up against a little barrier. Do you remember I said that agents often said to me, we don't really know where this sits on the market or what kind of genre that is? Yeah, that hasn't changed. I've had this problem with every single novel I've ever written. They're partly in a genre and partly something else like literary fiction or something like that. There's a mix to them. They're never fully sci-fi or they're never fully crime. There's always just an element of something else to them, which makes them really hard to classify. That's why I've had trouble getting them traditionally published before, or that's one of the many reasons I'm sure that I've had trouble with it. That's something I'm gonna have to think about, but for now, I'm gonna say this book is sci-fi, but the kind of sci-fi it is, it's set on planet Earth, there's no off-planet travel, it's set in the 80s, it's very much a sci-fi that could happen. The kind of sci-fi that I like the most is books by Andy Weir or Blake Crouch, that kind of book. Obviously, Andy Weir's books take place off the planet, but Blake Crouch's don't. For some reason, I completely forgot about Emily St. John Mandel, despite the fact that she's my favourite author. And while you can argue that her books aren't entirely sci-fi, and some of them aren't, Station 11 won an Arthur C. Clarke Award, and her latest book, that's just come out and you should buy, by the way, it's definitely sci-fi, so I'm claiming it. It's kind of sci-fi in our contemporary world, so no aliens, a little bit more science. In terms of the plot, I won't go into a massive amount of detail at this point, not because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's going to read the story in the future, because to be perfectly honest, you're other writers. You're not my intended audience for this book, so I'm not going to be marketing to you. When I've finished writing the book, I might mention it, but other than that, I'm going to spoil the story because it's more useful to me, and I think probably more useful to you, if I talk about how I've structured the story and how I've gone through different stages of writing it while actually talking about the story itself rather than just in vague terms, because it's really difficult to understand what the hell I was talking about in that case. I haven't really got all the intricacies of the plot figured out yet. I've got the broad arc and I've got the main message that I want to get across, but all of the small sections of plot, all of the different plot points and bullet points and all that stuff, haven't figured all that out yet. But essentially the book's about a specific scientific phenomenon that's been detected across the world in a load of different locations. And some of those locations form the setting of what will be the book. Each of those settings are research bases. There's one in Antarctica, there's one in Thailand, there's one in Eastern Europe, and there's a few other settings as well. There's one in Australia as well. I almost forgot about that, though that was the main one I thought of when I came up with the novel. Each of those locations is a separate strand of the story, and I'm going to be moving through them and alternating as I go through the book. As well as that, I'm probably going to throw in some interviews and some newspaper articles and other stuff like that just to keep it a bit more interesting and to make sure it doesn't get boring. But the sun's disappearing. That's a tendency I have with my writing. It may not be true to life, my stories might not actually be bland, but I tend to find if I just write straight story, straight prose all the way through a book, I get bored when I read it back. So I want to make sure I keep things in there that might be interesting to readers. And purists of the novel might really hate that. That's okay. Maybe the book won't be for you. I don't really have a problem with that. But for me, I like seeing that stuff. I feel like it gives another perspective to the story that you might otherwise be missing. It's a great way to balance a little bit of exposition. It's a great way to get that in without having to do it awkwardly through dialogue. So I'm going to probably put a bit of that in as well. In terms of characters, there's a lot, more than I've ever written in a book actually. With there being 4 or 5 separate sections and settings, there has to be 4 or 5 separate sets of characters. And some of those groups of characters are going to be larger than others, but there's probably going to be at least 10 characters, but probably only 4 main characters. I'm just sort of figuring it out at the moment and trying to do what I think is best for the story as opposed to what I want to write, because those two might not actually be in parallel with each other. I know my skills as a writer, and this is ambitious for me. It's going to test me, and I'm really going to have to work hard to get this to work properly, but it's the kind of novel that I've always wanted to write. It's the kind of novel that I want to read, so that usually is a good indication that it's the type of thing that you should be writing. If you want to read it and it doesn't exist, or you haven't found it yet, write it yourself. That's what I'm trying to do. It's going to be difficult for me because there's a lot in this book that I haven't really done before that I want to. Like, it's going to take a lot of research, which isn't something that I've typically spent an awful lot of time on, but I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to learn how to do that. I'm going to have to learn how to structure this entire thing, which is a problem all of its own, which I'll get to. But it's going to be hard. The whole thing's going to be difficult, but it's about time I tried to do something that's going to challenge me and got out of my comfort zone a little bit. Been a few days since that last clip, and I'm already encountering some problems, so mission accomplished. A particular problem that I'm having is figuring out how to organise this whole thing. As I said before, I'm approaching this novel in a slightly different way and feeling different about it than I have any previous novel I've ever written. I need a way to organise all these different strands of story and all these different characters and their backstories and plots and subplots and locations and scenes and themes. There's a lot of stuff to keep just in your brain. I need somewhere to put it down. So I made a community post asking for your suggestions on how to organise this. And those varied from writing it down on a piece of paper, which is, it's a good low-tech solution. I like it. I do generally get on well with analogue solutions to stuff like paper books and vinyl records. But a few of you also suggested stuff like software and gave me a few examples of the stuff that you use. I've used Scrivener before. I didn't really like the interface all that much. There was a few problems with it. I used it for a while, but after I kind of had some data problems with it too, where I lost quite a bit of a project and had to recover it, and it seemed like a bit of a pain. So I didn't get on too well with that, but I'm definitely open to software like that in the future. The way I figured out I had this problem came from my novel plan, which is currently just a really messy Google Docs document full of photographs, character bios, plot lines, bullet points. There's loads of stuff in there, and I realized I need a way to organize all this stuff because there's several strands of story. All those different strands of stories all need writing, and they all have to be in the book to make it all work. I'm pretty sure of that. But I know I can't write them all at the same time because there's too much to remember with each of them. But I can't write any of them in its entirety and then go back and write the others, because then I won't know how how they all work together. It's a problem. So far, I've just been working on whichever strand of story takes my attention at any particular time. If I get to the end of what I have planned for one of them, I just move to the other. And it works for now because I only have to remember a certain amount about these strands of story because they're all quite short. But that brings me to how exactly I'm writing this book, because it is different. Previously, when I've written novels, I've had a time frame in mind, or at least, a goal for when I want to get the first draft finished, or how many words a day I want to get down. I've talked time and time again on this channel about how word count goals just don't work for me. They don't motivate me. It's just another thing to feel like I'm behind on. So I'm not going to be doing that. The way I've been doing it recently just works so much better. I don't have any pressure on myself when I sit down to do some writing about how much I'm going to get done. I write until it stops being fun. That's it. Sometimes it's 100 words, sometimes it's 1200, really just depends on the day. My last video was about Ernest Hemingway's writing advice, and in that he gave a practical tip not to finish writing what you're writing every day. So if you've got a plan, don't finish that plan, don't write all the way to the end of it, because if you leave some writing or something unsaid, it's a lot easier to come back to it the next day, and that's been working for me. That's been working really well. I'm stopping while I'm at the height of what I'm doing, and it means that the next day I'm actually, motivated to get on with it. So I'm going to keep doing that, but only on the days where I actually feel like writing. The other thing I've changed is the pace of the novel, or how it moves from scene to scene, because previously, we all know when you're planning a book, it has to go from, plot point to plot point, to move seamlessly between them, and then that's a novel. You get from point A to point end of the book. But I've always found that when you can feel an author doing that, or when you can feel a writer moving you from one point to another, it feels like it's on rails and you lose all immersion. And immersion is really important to me as a novel writer. It's what I want to give whoever reads my writing. I want them to feel immersed in the story and forget that they're reading for a while. And when you can detect the handholds that the author is using to get themselves through the story, I find it kind of kills that. I don't plan my novels in their entirety all the way through bullet point by bullet point. I have once, as I said, and I hated it. I tend to plot out the big moments and then wing it between them. The danger with that approach is always that I could just write what could happen. Oh yeah, that'll work. Yeah, why not? Let's move to that. Let's do this at this point, and then the next bit and the next bit. You can get into a pattern like that really quick where you think, oh wow, I'm on 50,000 words, I've written half a novel. But a lot of it, more than you probably want to admit to yourself, is actually filler. So I'm going to make a real effort not to do that at all. What I want to do is really think about the scenes that I'm writing. Where can I open the scene? How can I close it? What's the character doing? The basis of all of that really comes from trying to give the characters a life that feels like it happens off the page as well as on it. Having spent the last couple of years writing short fiction, I've really been focused on moments within characters' lives because that's all I really had space for a lot of the time. Short, significant moments in a character's life, and I'm trying now to bring that to novel writing. So instead of having a character get up and go for a walk just for no reason because I've got to have something in the book, I'm trying instead to replace it with one of those moments of significance that in some way matters either to the plot of the book or the reader's enjoyment of it, or creating that effect that the character's life is bigger than just the book. It's really hard to explain this concept, and I'll probably end up doing a longer video on just that if I can figure out how the hell to do it. Who knows? But that's what I'm aiming for, and the approach so far, I think, has borne pretty good results. I will, of course, keep you updated as I go through writing this book, because I've had a few comments lately saying they'd like to see a bit more of my internal process and my method for writing, so I'll provide more videos like this as I go along. But they might be a bit intermittent because I'm always going to be prioritizing the actual writing over making videos about it, which I'm sure you understand. What I'm looking forward to most of all, though, is being able to put some of those techniques that I've talked about and some new techniques that I will inevitably find out about and learn while I'm writing this to the test. I'm looking forward to shaping a long plot again and tying everything together. It's going to challenge me, but I think it's going to be in a good way. And whether I end up pulling this off and it turns into an entire novel, or I get burned out or fed up, or I go wrong somewhere and I end up halfway, I'll still document that because there's always stuff to be learned. You could argue you learn a lot more through failure than success, but I'm really hoping for success on this one because I'm excited about it, and hopefully that'll translate to the page. It's always a good start. My primary focus for this is going to be making the most of the time I can spend writing. And I think that practical tip of always leaving yourself a little room and a little more story every time you finish writing for the day, so you've got something to come back to, I think that's really going to help me propel myself through the course of this book. That was definitely the best practical tip from that Ernest Hemingway video, but for a few more pearls of wisdom about how you can make the most complex stuff in writing a little bit simpler, don't forget to watch that video next.